Hey there. Tonight, as you settle into your uninterrupted 8 hours of blissful sleep, let me transport you back to a time when your ancestors would find such continuous slumber absolutely bizarre. Picture yourself in the year 1398, in a small English village, where the church bells have just rung for sunset. You're about to discover why every single person in medieval Europe, from peasants to nobles, deliberately woke up in the middle of every night, and why they thought those who didn't were either ill or possibly possessed by demons. Welcome to another bedtime documentary, where history's most peculiar practices become tonight's gentle pathway to sleep. I see you've joined us from... Let me check the comments. Ah yes, viewers from London, Tokyo, New York, and even someone watching from a small town in Iceland at 2 a.m. How wonderfully appropriate for tonight's tale. Before we begin this journey through the forgotten rhythms of medieval night, do let me know in the comments below. What time do you usually wake up naturally during the night? You might be surprised to learn you're following an ancient pattern. So, dim the lights, adjust your pillow just so, and prepare to meet Thomas, a wool merchant's son in the village of Westbury, whose nightly routine would seem alien to you, yet was as natural to him as breathing. Through his eyes, you'll experience why medieval villagers not only accepted but cherished their interrupted sleep, and how this practice shaped everything from crime to creativity, prayer to procreation, in ways that would astound modern sleep scientists. You follow Thomas as he makes his way through the narrow, mud-caked streets of Westbury, just as the autumn sun begins its descent behind the thatched roofs. The year is 1398, and at 16 summers old, Thomas has known no other way of life than the one dictated by the sun's journey across the sky. As darkness approaches, you watch him hurry past the baker's shop, where old Willem is already banking his ovens for the night. The absence of artificial light means that once the sun sets, the world transforms into something entirely different. A realm where shadows hold dominion, and every footstep must be carefully considered. Thomas clutches a small bundle of tallow candles, a precious commodity that his father, Master Edmund, has allocated for the evening's work. Each candle represents nearly a day's wages for a common labourer, and they must be used sparingly. You notice how Thomas's fingers unconsciously count them through the rough cloth wrapping. Only 3 tonight. Enough for perhaps 2 hours of dim light, if they're careful. The church bell tolls, its bronze voice carrying across the village, announcing the approach of Compline, the last prayer service before the first sleep. Around you, shutters are being secured, animals are being brought in from the fields, and the entire village prepares for the long darkness ahead. Thomas quickens his pace, knowing that his mother, Agnes, will be anxious if he's not home before full dark. The very air seems to thicken as daylight fades, and you understand that in this world, nightfall isn't just the absence of day. It's the arrival of an entirely different existence, one that demands respect, preparation, and most importantly, a complete restructuring of sleep itself. You enter the modest dwelling that Thomas calls home, a 2-room structure that houses not just his immediate family, but also 2 apprentices and a serving girl named Marjorie. The main room serves as workshop, kitchen, and gathering space, while the single upper chamber holds all the sleeping arrangements. As your eyes adjust to the dim interior, you notice how every member of the household moves with practiced efficiency, preparing for the night ahead. Thomas's mother, Agnes, stirs a pot of pottage over the central hearth, the smoke curling up to escape through a hole in the roof. His younger sister, little Joan, only 7 years old, is already yawning as she helps Marjorie spread fresh rushes on the floor. The apprentices, Richard and Hugh, are securing the wool stores and checking that all the valuable tools are locked away. Master Edmund himself sits at the rough wooden table, making final marks in his ledger by the light of a single, carefully positioned candle. You realize that this scene, playing out as darkness falls, is repeated in virtually every household across Europe. The approaching night isn't fought against or feared, but rather embraced as a natural rhythm. Thomas places the precious candles in a small wooden box near the hearth, saving them for the wakeful period that will come later. As the family gathers for the evening meal, you understand that they're not preparing for a single, long sleep, but for the first of two distinct sleeping periods that will define their night. The concept of sleeping straight through until dawn would seem as foreign to them as their segmented sleep seems to you. You observe as the family performs their evening prayers, a ritual as essential to their daily rhythm as eating or breathing. Master Edmund leads them in Latin phrases that most don't fully understand, but the cadence and familiarity bring comfort as darkness fully claims the world outside. Through the one small window, you can see that the sky has transformed into an ocean of stars, unmarred by any artificial light, for miles in any direction. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a celestial river, so bright that it actually provides a faint illumination to the world below. After prayers, Agnes portions out the simple evening meal: dark bread, a thin pottage of barley and vegetables, and a small portion of cheese that represents a luxury in this household. You notice how they eat slowly, deliberately, knowing that this meal must sustain them through the first sleep and into the wakeful period that follows. Thomas shares a trencher with his sister Joan, both of them using their eating knives to spear pieces of turnip from the communal bowl. The apprentices eat with the quiet respect due to their master's table, while Marjorie serves before taking her own portion by the hearth. As they eat, Master Edmund speaks of tomorrow's plans: wool to be sorted, thread to be spun, accounts to be settled with the Fullers. But you sense an underlying current of anticipation for what comes after the first sleep, during those mysterious hours when the village will wake again, not from laziness or disorder, but from a biological rhythm as old as humanity itself. You climb the narrow wooden ladder behind Thomas to the upper chamber, where the entire household will soon settle for their first sleep. The room is surprisingly small for the 8 people who must share it, and you understand immediately why privacy was a foreign concept to medieval minds. The sleeping arrangements follow a strict hierarchy that reflects the social order of the household. Master Edmund and Agnes have the only proper bed, a wooden frame with rope supports and a straw-filled mattress, curtained for a semblance of privacy. Thomas shares a smaller pallet with the 2 apprentices, while Joan sleeps on a truckle bed that slides under her parents' bed during the day. Poor Marjorie makes do with a straw pallet near the door, the coldest and least comfortable spot. As everyone prepares for sleep, you notice the elaborate rituals involved. Agnes checks that the fire below is properly banked, reducing the risk of night fires that could consume the entire village. Thomas helps his father secure the money box under the main bed, while the apprentices ensure all the windows are shuttered tight against the night air, which everyone knows carries disease and evil vapors. Joan says her special prayer to St. Christopher for protection during sleep, a practice her mother taught her to ward off night terrors. You realize that going to bed isn't simply lying down to rest. It's a complex process of securing, protecting, and preparing for the vulnerable hours ahead, when consciousness will be surrendered not once, but twice. You settle into the darkness alongside Thomas as the last candle is extinguished with a small brass snuffer, plunging the room into absolute blackness. The darkness is so complete that you cannot see your hand before your face, a depth of shadow unknown in your modern world of streetlights and glowing screens. At first, the silence seems absolute. But gradually, your ears adjust, and you begin to hear the night symphony of medieval life. Through the thin walls comes the sound of neighbors also settling for their first sleep. A crying baby quickly hushed, the creak of rope beds, someone coughing in the house next door. From outside drift other sounds, the night watch calling the hour, dogs barking in the distance, and the occasional lowing of cattle from the common fields. Thomas lies still beside the apprentices, but you can tell from his breathing that he's not yet asleep. Like everyone in his world, he has learned to fall asleep quickly and efficiently, wasting none of the precious darkness. Within minutes, the rhythm of breathing throughout the room begins to synchronize and deepen. Agnes murmurs something in her sleep, and Master Edmund's snoring soon provides a steady bass note to the night's chorus. You realize that this first sleep, which they call the dead sleep or first sleep, is different from what you might expect. It's deeper, more profound than modern sleep. As if their bodies, attuned to natural rhythms, are eagerly embracing this first period of rest. Yet even as Thomas finally drifts off, you sense that his body already knows it will wake again in a few hours, ready for the strangest part of the medieval night. You drift through the first sleep alongside Thomas, experiencing dreams that seem more vivid and meaningful than any you've known in your modern life. Medieval people believed that dreams during the first sleep were messages from God or visions of the future. And as you share Thomas's sleeping mind, you begin to understand why. The dreams are intense, colourful, and seemingly significant. Thomas dreams of wool transforming into golden thread, of his father teaching him the secret marks that identify the finest fleeces, of a journey to the great fair at Stourbridge that he's never taken, but hopes to join next year. These aren't the fragmented, nonsensical dreams you might be familiar with, but structured narratives that seem to carry weight and meaning. In houses throughout the village, others are experiencing similar profound dreams. You're aware somehow that Agnes is dreaming of her mother's recipes, trying to remember the exact herbs that made her famous healing salve. The apprentice, Richard, dreams of his own shop someday, while little Joan's dreams are filled with the angels and saints from the church windows. This first sleep typically lasts 3 to 4 hours, and during this time, the body performs its deepest restoration. Heart rates slow to their lowest point, growth occurs in children, and the mind processes the day's experiences into memory. The medieval belief that the first sleep was blessed by God seems less superstitious when you experience its profound, restorative power. Yet even in the depths of this sleep, some part of Thomas's consciousness remains aware that this is temporary, that soon he will rise into the quiet hours that belong neither to day nor night. You become aware of a gradual stirring in the darkness as Thomas begins to surface from his first sleep. It's not the jarring awakening of an alarm or disturbance, but a natural, gentle emergence from the depths of slumber. His body knows, through countless generations of inherited rhythm, but it's time for the watching hour. Around midnight, though no clock chimes in this humble dwelling, Thomas's eyes open to the familiar, absolute darkness. You sense others awakening too. The rustle of straw as Richard shifts on his pallet, the soft sigh from behind the bed curtains, where Agnes is also emerging from her first sleep. This awakening is so common, so expected, that there's even a special word for this time. The dorveil, from the French, meaning wake, sleep. Thomas lies still for a moment, allowing his mind to fully surface while his body remains relaxed and warm under the rough woolen blanket. Unlike the grogginess you might feel when woken in the middle of the night, Thomas feels remarkably alert and peaceful. His mind is clear, almost luminous, with a quality of consciousness that seems different from both full wakefulness and sleep. Through the darkness you hear Master Edmund's voice, soft and conversational, asking Agnes about her dreams. This is normal, expected. The watching hour is a time for quiet conversation between husband and wife, for the sharing of dreams that might contain important messages or warnings. Thomas listens to his parents' low murmuring, a comforting sound that tells him all is well in the household, and the world continues its proper course through the night. You experience with Thomas the strange liberty of the watching hour, a time when the normal rules of daily life are suspended and different activities become possible. Master Edmund rises from his bed and, moving with the practiced ease of someone who has navigated this darkness thousands of times, makes his way to the chamber pot in the corner. There's no shame or embarrassment in this. Bodily functions during the watching hour are as natural as breathing. Agnes remains in bed but sits up, her voice carrying softly through the darkness, as she tells Edmund about her dream of her deceased mother, wondering if it might be a message about the coming harvest. Thomas knows he could rise if he wished, could go downstairs to check the fire, or even step outside to observe the stars. But tonight, he chooses to remain in the warmth of his pallet. The apprentices are whispering together, and from their suppressed chuckles, Thomas suspects they're sharing crude jokes, another common feature of the watching hour, when the usual proprieties are relaxed. Through the thin walls, you can hear similar sounds from other houses, quiet conversations, the creak of floorboards as someone moves about. Even the rhythmic sounds that suggest some neighbors are taking advantage of this wakeful time for marital intimacy. The watching hour, you realize, is when much of the real emotional and social life of the medieval world takes place. Without the demands of work and the watching eyes of daylight society, people can be more themselves. Prayers are said, but they're personal and heartfelt, rather than formal. Plans are made, worries are shared, and the deep bonds of family and household are strengthened in this strange kingdom of darkness. You listen with Thomas as Master Edmund decides to light one of the precious candles, a decision that transforms the watching hour into something more productive. The striking of flint against steel sends small sparks cascading through the darkness, until one catches on the charcloth, creating a tiny ember that Edmund carefully nurses into flame. The single candle, when lit, seems almost supernaturally bright after the absolute darkness, casting dancing shadows that make the familiar room appear mysterious and different. Edmund brings his ledger to the bed, propping it on his knees as he reviews his accounts by this meager light. This is common practice among merchants and craftsmen. The watching hour provides uninterrupted time for mental work that's impossible during the busy daylight hours. Agnes takes advantage of the light to work on her needlework, her fingers moving with practiced skill, despite the dim illumination. You notice Thomas watching his parents with interest, learning through observation how successful adults use every available moment productively. The apprentice Hugh has also risen and sits by the dying embers of the hearth downstairs, practicing his letters on a wax tablet, the scratching of his stylus just audible from above. Through the window, you glimpse other small lights flickering in windows throughout the village. Not many, for candles are expensive, but enough to know that this wakeful productivity is widespread. Some are praying, others working, still others simply contemplating in the special clarity that the watching hour brings. Thomas considers rising to practice his numbers, but the warmth of his bed and the hypnotic flickering of his father's candle keep him in a state of peaceful alertness. You experience with Thomas a profound spiritual moment as the church bell tolls for matins, the night prayer service that marks the middle of the watching hour. Though few villagers will actually rise and walk to the church in the cold darkness, the bell serves as a reminder that this wakeful time has been consecrated by centuries of religious tradition. Monks and nuns throughout Christendom are rising for their midnight prayers. And even in this humble merchant's household, the sacred nature of the watching hour is acknowledged. Agnes sets aside her needlework and begins to recite the Paternoster in whispered Latin, her words joining an invisible chorus of prayers rising from houses throughout the village. Master Edmund closes his ledger and joins her, their voices harmonizing in the familiar cadences. Thomas knows he should pray too, but his mind wanders to more earthly concerns. The girl he glimpsed at last week's market, the sword he saw in the blacksmith shop, the stories the travelling merchants tell of London and its wonders. This mental wandering during prayer is so common that priests regularly warn against it, calling the watching hour a time when the devil tempts the faithful with impure thoughts. Yet there's something about this liminal time, suspended between two sleeps, that makes the mind naturally drift toward desires and dreams, usually suppressed during daylight hours. Joan has awakened and, in her innocence, asks if the angels are awake too. Agnes assures her that angels never sleep, always watching over good children. And you sense how these midnight conversations shape the spiritual worldview of medieval childhood, creating a universe populated by invisible protectors and supernatural dangers. You observe as Thomas finally decides to rise during the watching hour, drawn by a need to relieve himself and a restlessness that won't let him return to sleep just yet. Moving carefully in the darkness, he makes his way down the ladder, his bare feet finding each worn rung through years of practice. The main room below is not completely dark. The banked fire still glows with dim red embers, providing just enough light to navigate. The apprentice Hugh has returned to his pallet, but Thomas can see he's still awake, his eyes reflecting the faint firelight. Outside, through the cracks in the shutters, Thomas hears footsteps and low voices. The night watch is making rounds, but there are others abroad too. People taking advantage of the watching hour for activities that daylight would forbid or make difficult. Some are checking on animals, others visiting neighbours for quiet conversations or transactions that require privacy. There's even old Martha, the village's unofficial midwife and herb woman, who everyone knows gathers her most potent plants during the watching hour when their power is strongest. Thomas steps outside to use the privy, and the cold night air shocks him fully awake. Above, the stars wheel in their eternal dance, and the Milky Way streams across the sky like a celestial road. For a moment, he stands transfixed by the cosmic display, understanding why philosophers claim the watching hour provides the clearest window into divine truth. The village lies in almost complete darkness, except for those few precious candles flickering in windows, each one marking a soul awake in the great darkness. You return inside with Thomas to find an unexpected scene unfolding in the darkness of the main room. Master Edmund has come downstairs with his candle and discovered that someone has been in the wool stores. Nothing is missing, but the bales have been disturbed, and Edmund's voice carries a sharp edge of suspicion as he questions the apprentices. This is one of the darker aspects of the watching hour, a time when theft, adultery, and other crimes often occur under cover of the universal wakefulness. Everyone knows that thieves prefer the watching hour because households are awake but drowsy, alert enough not to be surprised, but often too comfortable in their beds to investigate strange noises. Richard protests his innocence, while Hugh remains silent, and Thomas realizes he's witnessing one of those small household dramas that the watching hour often reveals. Edmund's candle casts accusatory shadows as he examines the disturbed wool, looking for evidence of tampering. Agnes has come to the top of the ladder, her voice calling down, asking what's wrong, while little Joan peers around her mother's skirts, frightened by the tension. You understand that in a world without police or formal investigation, these midnight discoveries and confrontations are how justice often begins. Thomas remembers hearing about the baker's apprentice who was caught stealing during the watching hour last month, dismissed immediately and branded a thief throughout the county. The accusation hangs in the air like smoke from the dying fire, and Thomas realizes that by morning, the household dynamics might be forever changed. Yet this too is part of the watching hour's purpose, a time when hidden truths emerge from the shadows. You witness the resolution of the crisis as Master Edmund's investigation reveals the true culprit. Not theft, but rats that have gnawed through the protective cloth and nested in the wool. The relief in the room is palpable as Edmund's anger transforms into frustrated concern about protecting his valuable inventory. Hugh finally speaks, suggesting they could get a cat from the monastery, where the monks breed exceptional mouses. The tension dissolves into practical discussion, and you realize how quickly the watching hour can shift from suspicion to collaboration. Agnes comes down with Joan, who has been unable to return to sleep after the disturbance. This too is common. Once awakened during the watching hour, children often remain alert until the second sleep. Agnes prepares a small cup of weak ale mixed with herbs to help Joan settle, a remedy passed down through generations. Thomas helps his father rearrange the wool bales, checking for more signs of rodent damage, while Richard holds the candle. The simple domestic crisis has actually brought the household together in common purpose, and you sense how these midnight challenges strengthen the bonds of medieval community. Through the window, the first cock crows. Not for dawn, which is still hours away, but for the midnight marking that country people have always known. Soon it will be time for the second sleep, but not quite yet. The watching hour still has more to reveal, more quiet moments of family intimacy and shared purpose that daylight would never allow. Edmund speaks of tomorrow's need to visit the monastery, turning crisis into opportunity, while Agnes rocks Joan gently, humming an ancient lullaby. You settle with Thomas back onto his pallet as the household prepares for the second sleep, known as the morning sleep or light sleep. The drama of the watching hour has passed, leaving everyone tired but oddly satisfied, as if important work has been accomplished in the darkness. The candle is extinguished again, more carefully this time to preserve every bit of remaining wax for future nights. As darkness reclaims the room, you notice how different this settling feels from the first sleep. Bodies are more relaxed, minds less anxious about the coming day. The watching hour has served its purpose. Prayers have been said, concerns addressed, bodily needs met, and the mysterious psychological pressure that builds during continuous sleep has been released. Thomas pulls his rough blanket up to his chin, feeling the warmth that his body has maintained throughout the wakeful period. Beside him, the apprentices whisper briefly about tomorrow's work before falling silent. From above comes the gentle creaking of the rope bed as his parents settle for their second sleep. Joan has been soothed by her mother's herbal drink and lies quietly on her truckle bed, already drifting toward dreams. You understand now that this second sleep will be different from the first. Lighter, more filled with the dreams that process not just the previous day, but also the thoughts and conversations of the watching hour. Medieval people believed the second sleep brought prophetic dreams and visions, especially just before dawn. As Thomas's breathing deepens, you prepare to experience this lighter but equally important phase of medieval rest. You drift with Thomas into the second sleep, noticing immediately how this slumber differs from the first, deep rest. His sleep is lighter, punctuated by more frequent movements and a greater awareness of his surroundings even while unconscious. The dreams that come are vivid, but different in character. Where the first sleep brought symbolic, almost mystical visions, these dreams are more practical, more connected to daily life. Thomas dreams of the coming wool fair, of counting coins and measuring cloth, of the specific techniques his father has been teaching him for judging wool quality. Yet, interwoven with these mundane concerns are stranger elements. The rats from earlier appear in his dreams as massive creatures guarding a treasure, and the girl from the market smiles at him while spinning golden thread. Throughout the village, others experience similar, practical yet fantastical dreams. You're somehow aware that Agnes dreams of recipes transforming into healing spells, that Master Edmund sees ledgers whose numbers rearrange themselves into sacred patterns. The apprentice Richard dreams of his future shop, but in his vision, it grows grander with each passing moment until it rivals the Guildhalls of London. These second sleep dreams, you realize, are where medieval people unconsciously planned their futures, solved problems, and integrated the spiritual with the material. The church bells remain silent during this period, respecting the second sleep, though occasionally a dog barks or an owl calls, sounds that incorporate themselves seamlessly into the flowing dreamscape. This lighter sleep allows for a different kind of restoration. Not the deep physical healing of the first sleep, but a psychological and emotional rebalancing. You experience with Thomas the gradual lightening of the world as the second sleep approaches its natural end. Though the sun won't rise for another hour, the quality of darkness begins to change, shifting from the absolute black of middle night to the deep grey that presages dawn. Birds haven't yet begun their morning chorus, but there's a sense of anticipation in the air, as if the world itself is preparing to wake. Thomas's body responds to these subtle signals, his sleep becoming progressively lighter, until he exists in that borderland between sleeping and waking that medieval people called the threshold time. In this state, he's aware of sounds beginning throughout the village. The baker Willem is already up, preparing his ovens for the day's bread, and the blacksmith's hammer rings distantly as he begins early work by firelight. Yet Thomas doesn't fully wake. Instead, he floats in this liminal space where thoughts and dreams intermingle freely. He thinks about the day ahead while still partially dreaming, planning his tasks while imaginary elements creep into his considerations. This threshold time was considered sacred by medieval people, a moment when the veil between worlds was thinnest and divine inspiration most likely to strike. Poets claimed their best verses came during this time, while merchants reported sudden insights into profitable ventures. Thomas experiences it as a profound peace, a sense of rightness with the world's rhythm that modern sleep patterns rarely provide. His body has completed its natural cycle of rest, restoration, and contemplation, preparing him for the coming day in ways that continuous sleep never could. You witness the official end of the night as the church bells ring for prime, the first prayer service of the new day, though darkness still cloaks the village. This is the signal for the full awakening from the second sleep, and throughout the household, bodies begin to stir with purpose, rather than the gentle emergence of the watching hour. Master Edmund is first to rise, his feet hitting the floor with the decisive sound of a man ready to face the day's challenges. Agnes follows, immediately beginning the complex process of dressing in the dark. Shift, kirtle, overdress, and finally the linen cap that marks her as a respectable married woman. Thomas rises more slowly, his young body reluctant to leave the warmth of his pallet, despite having had more than adequate rest through his 2-sleep cycle. The apprentices groan, but rise obediently, knowing that tardiness will earn them cold porridge and possibly a cuff from Master Edmund. Little Joan is allowed to sleep a bit longer, a privilege of her young age. You notice how different this morning rising feels from what you know in your modern world. There's no grogginess, no desperate need for stimulants to achieve wakefulness. The two-sleep pattern has left everyone genuinely rested and ready for the day. Thomas dresses quickly in the cold, brace, hose, tunic and belt, his fingers working the familiar fastenings in the darkness. Downstairs, Agnes has already begun stirring the fire back to life, adding fresh wood to the embers that have smouldered through the night. The day begins not with artificial light, but with the gradual assertion of human activity against the retreating darkness. You join Thomas in the pre-dawn labour that begins every medieval day, work that must be completed before the sun provides enough light for the primary business of the household. By touch and firelight more than sight, Thomas helps the apprentices prepare the woolworking area, setting out the tools that will be needed once proper daylight arrives. The combs for carding, the spindles for thread making, the measuring rods for checking cloth lengths. Each item has its specific place, and finding them in the semi-darkness is a skill developed over years. Agnes has prepared a simple breakfast of day-old bread soaked in ale, with a small portion of cheese for Master Edmund and a bit of honey for Joan, who has finally been roused from her extended sleep. The meal is eaten standing or moving about, as there's much to accomplish before the day truly begins. Through the shutters, the eastern sky shows the faintest blush of colour. Not yet sunrise, but the promise of it. Thomas is sent to fetch water from the communal well, a task that requires navigating the still dark streets, where he encounters other early risers engaged in similar errands. The baker's shop glows with the light of his ovens, and the smell of fresh bread beginning to bake provides a sensory marker of the approaching day. At the well, Thomas exchanges brief greetings with other water carriers, their faces barely visible in the growing twilight. This pre-dawn community, you realize, is bound together by the shared rhythm of the two-sleep pattern, all having emerged from their second sleep at roughly the same time, all preparing for the day in this liminal period between night and morning. You experience with Thomas the magical moment of sunrise, when the first true rays of sunlight pierce the gap between the eastern hills and transform the world from grey shadow to golden possibility. The transformation is dramatic and sudden. One moment the village exists in twilight, the next it's bathed in the warm light of a new day. Roosters crow in earnest now, not the midnight false dawn, but the true herald of morning. Thomas pauses in his work to watch the light creep across the village, illuminating first the church tower, then the rooftops, and finally reaching into the narrow streets themselves. This moment, you understand, marks the official beginning of the medieval workday. Shutters are thrown open throughout the village, and the sounds of full daily activity begin. Hammering from the smithy, sawing from the carpenter's shop, the clatter of looms starting up in the weaver's quarter. In the merchant's house, Master Edmund opens his shop front, the heavy wooden shutters folding down to create a counter for displaying his wool samples. Agnes sends Marjorie to the market for fresh vegetables, while she continues preparing the large midday meal that will sustain the household through the afternoon's work. Thomas is given his first real task of the day, sorting through a new shipment of raw wool, separating the fine from the coarse, checking for quality and contamination. As his fingers work through the fleeces, you realize that his night of segmented sleep has left him perfectly alert for this detailed work, his mind clear and focused in a way that seems remarkably different from the coffee-fueled alertness of your modern world. You immerse yourself with Thomas in the full rhythm of the medieval working day, understanding now how the two-sleep pattern has prepared everyone for the long hours of labor ahead. The morning progresses with remarkable efficiency. Thomas works alongside the apprentices, learning the finer points of wool grading, while Master Edmund negotiates with a cloth merchant from the neighbouring town. The clarity of mind that follows the segmented sleep pattern becomes evident in the precision of everyone's work. Agnes manages the household with the energy of someone genuinely rested, directing Marjorie and cheesemaking while simultaneously overseeing Joan's lessons in spinning. The little girl sits in a patch of sunlight, her small fingers learning to twist thread from raw wool, a skill she'll need as a merchant's daughter. The absence of artificial lighting means that every moment of daylight must be utilized. Yet no one seems stressed or hurried. The two-sleep pattern has provided them with a sustainable energy that will last until sunset. Around midday, the church bells ring for sext, the noon prayer, and work pauses briefly. The main meal is served, a hearty pottage, thick with barley and beans, fresh bread from Willem's bakery, and a special treat of bacon that Agnes has been saving. Thomas eats heartily, his appetite sharpened by the morning's work and the complete rest of the previous night. Through the open shutters, you can see the village at its most active. Carts rumbling through the streets, merchants cooling their wares, children playing in the brief break their parents allow them. This, you realize, is the life that the two-sleep pattern was designed to support. Intense daylight activity, balanced by the restorative segments of night. You continue with Thomas through the long afternoon, observing how the medieval workday extends far beyond what modern labour laws would permit, yet seems sustainable due to the restorative power of segmented sleep. As the sun begins its western descent, casting longer shadows through the shop, Thomas notices something peculiar. Several of the village's elderly residents have begun to settle in sunny corners for what they call the old man's nap. This midday sleep, you learn, is considered a privilege of age and infirmity, not laziness. Younger, healthy adults who sleep during daylight are viewed with suspicion, possibly ill or certainly idle. But for the elderly, this additional rest segment is accepted as necessary for maintaining the two-sleep pattern when their nighttime sleep becomes lighter with age. Thomas's grandmother, who lives in the cottage next door, takes such a nap daily, and she claims it allows her to participate fully in the watching hour despite her 70 years. The afternoon work continues, with wool being carded, spun, and prepared for market. Master Edmund teaches Thomas how to negotiate prices, demonstrating with a visiting merchant who wants to buy their finest wool for export to Flanders. The complexity of medieval commerce becomes apparent. Without standardized currency or banking, trade involves elaborate systems of credit, barter, and promise. Through it all, Thomas remains alert and focused, his mind sharp from the complete rest of his two-sleep night. As the afternoon progresses, you notice how the quality of work naturally adjusts to the diminishing light, with detailed tasks completed while the sun is high and simpler, more repetitive work saved for the fading light of late afternoon. You observe with Thomas as the day begins its inevitable surrender to approaching night, and the entire village starts preparing for another cycle of the two-sleep pattern. The sun hangs low on the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would be considered gaudy in your electric-lit world, but here represent the natural artwork that concludes each day. Master Edmund begins securing the shop, carefully storing the best wool samples in locked chests and ensuring all accounts are recorded before the light fails completely. Thomas helps with the evening preparations, understanding now that this isn't just about ending work, but about preparing for the complex sleep pattern ahead. Agnes has already begun preparing the evening meal, simpler than midday's feast: a vegetable pottage, some preserved meat, and the remaining bread from morning. The apprentices clean and oil the woolworking tools, knowing that morning's pre-dawn work will be easier if everything is properly maintained. Through the streets, you hear the familiar sounds of evening settling over the village. Animals being brought in from the fields, children being called home, shutters beginning to close against the approaching night. The blacksmith's hammer falls silent. The market stalls are dismantled, and the day workers begin their journey home before darkness makes travel dangerous. Thomas reflects on the day's lessons and accomplishments, his mind already beginning the gradual process of preparing for the first sleep. This mental preparation, you realize, is as important as the physical preparations. Medieval people consciously ready themselves for their segmented rest, unlike modern humans who often collapse into bed exhausted, hoping for oblivion. You experience with Thomas a disturbing interruption to the evening routine as word spreads through the village that young William, the cooper's son, has fallen gravely ill with a fever that came upon him suddenly during the afternoon. In the medieval world, such sudden illnesses are terrifying, potentially signaling the onset of plague or other epidemic diseases that can devastate entire communities. The normal preparations for the two-sleep pattern are forgotten as neighbors gather to offer help and, more importantly, to assess whether this illness poses a threat to their own families. Master Edmund forbids anyone from his household to visit the cooper's shop, but Agnes, known for her healing knowledge, prepares a bundle of herbs, feverfew, willow bark, and elderflower, which she sends with the priest who bravely goes to tend the sick boy. Thomas watches from the window as Father Benedict makes his way through the darkening streets, carrying not just the herbs, but also the sacred oil for last rites, should they be needed. The presence of serious illness changes the entire character of the approaching night. Instead of the peaceful progression toward first sleep, there's an undercurrent of anxiety throughout the village. People speak in hushed tones about whether they should flee to relatives in other villages or stay and trust in God's protection. The two-sleep pattern, Thomas realizes, assumes a basic level of health and safety. When disease threatens, the careful rhythm of segmented sleep becomes secondary to survival. Yet even in this crisis, the approaching darkness cannot be denied, and preparations for sleep must continue, though now with prayers for young William's recovery added to the usual evening devotions. You retire with Thomas to the sleeping chamber, where the family's evening prayers take on a desperate urgency in light of young William's illness. The familiar ritual of preparing for first sleep is observed, but with modifications. Master Edmund insists that everyone wash their hands and faces with water that Agnes has blessed with prayers and herbs, a precaution against the evil vapors that carry disease. Joan is particularly frightened, having played with William's younger sister just days ago, and Agnes must spend extra time soothing her fears with stories of saints who protected children from illness. As the family settles into their beds, the usual comfortable anticipation of first sleep is replaced by a watchful tension. Through the thin walls, they can hear similar anxious preparations in neighboring houses. More prayers than usual. Whispered conversations about whether to leave the village. The sound of someone nailing protective charms above their door. Thomas lies on his pallet, trying to achieve the mental calm necessary for first sleep. But his mind keeps returning to William, who is exactly his age, and was perfectly healthy just this morning. The two-sleep pattern he's learning is a luxury of the healthy. When death stalks the village, sleep becomes fitful and broken by fear rather than the natural rhythm of the watching hour. Yet exhaustion eventually claims him, and he begins to drift toward first sleep, though his dreams will surely be troubled by visions of illness and mortality. The church bells ring for Compline, but tonight they sound more like a death knell than a call to prayer. You experience with Thomas a first sleep, plagued by dark dreams and frequent wakings. The natural rhythm of segmented sleep disrupted by collective anxiety. Instead of the deep, restorative slumber that usually characterizes the first sleep, Thomas drifts in and out of consciousness, each time awakening to listen for sounds from the cooper's house down the street. Once he hears what might be wailing, and his blood runs cold, but it turns out to be just a cat in heat. The dreams that do come are fever dreams of their own. Visions of black-robed figures walking through the village, of church bells tolling endlessly, of William's face alternately burning with fever and pale as death. Around him, Thomas can sense that others are experiencing similar disrupted sleep. Agnes tosses and turns, occasionally murmuring prayers in her sleep. Master Edmund gets up twice to check the doors and windows, his usual confidence shaken by the proximity of serious illness. Even the apprentices, usually exhausted enough to sleep through anything, whisper nervously to each other in the darkness. This is how epidemic disease destroys the two-sleep pattern, Thomas realizes, not just by claiming victims, but by creating a climate of fear that makes normal rest impossible. The watching hour, when it comes, won't be a time of peaceful contemplation, but of anxious vigilance. Through the window, he glimpses torches moving through the streets, unusual for this time of night. Either the priest is gathering help, or worse, preparing for last rites. The natural order of night has been thoroughly disrupted, and with it, the careful balance of medieval life that depends on predictable patterns of work, rest, and restoration. You reach the watching hour with Thomas, but tonight it brings no peace, only heightened anxiety as the entire village seems to be awake and listening for news from the cooper's house. The natural waking that usually occurs around midnight has been replaced by a tense vigilance that never really allowed for deep sleep in the first place. Master Edmund lights a candle without his usual concern for preserving wax. In times of crisis, normal economies are suspended. By its light, the family gathers in the main room, rather than remaining in their beds as they usually would during the watching hour. Agnes prepares a soothing tea of chamomile and valerian, hoping to calm everyone's nerves enough for the second sleep, though she doubts it will be effective. Through the shutters, they can see unusual activity for the watching hour. Multiple lights moving through the streets, voices calling to each other, the sound of cartwheels, which suggests someone is either fleeing the village or bringing supplies for the sick. Thomas is sent to the door to gather news from passing neighbours, and he learns that William's fever has broken, but he remains delirious, speaking of visions and calling for his deceased grandmother. The priest has called for additional prayers, and several families are preparing to leave at first light if the boy's condition worsens. The watching hour, usually a time of intimate family connection, has become a communal vigil. Thomas understands that this is how communities survived in medieval times, through shared anxiety and mutual support, even when that meant sacrificing the restorative patterns of normal sleep. The two-sleep pattern, he realizes, is robust enough to handle occasional disruption, but prolonged crisis could destroy the delicate balance of medieval life. You witness with Thomas an unexpected turn as the church bells begin to ring during the watching hour. Not the steady toll that announces a death, but the rapid, joyful pealing that signals good news. Word spreads quickly through the wakeful village that young William's fever has completely broken and he has regained his senses, even asking for food, a sure sign of recovery in medieval medical understanding. The relief that washes through the household is palpable, and Agnes actually weeps with joy. Though William is not even a close relation, the crisis has passed, and with it, the terrible tension that made normal sleep impossible. Master Edmund says a prayer of thanksgiving, and the family joins him, their voices stronger and more confident than they've been all night. The watching hour, disrupted as it has been, suddenly transforms into something closer to its usual character, a time of reflection and gratitude rather than fear. Thomas feels the exhaustion of prolonged anxiety settling into his bones, and he knows the second sleep, when it comes, will be deep and healing. Around the village you can sense the collective sigh of relief as shutters open and neighbours call congratulations to each other. The cooper's voice, hoarse with emotion, thanks everyone for their prayers. The natural order is reasserting itself, and though the night has been far from normal, the two-sleep pattern proves resilient enough to accommodate even this crisis. Agnes prepares one final round of soothing tea, this time adding honey in celebration, and the family prepares to attempt their second sleep, with lighter hearts. You settle with Thomas into a second sleep that, despite the night's disruptions, proves surprisingly restorative. The relief from crisis has left everyone exhausted but peaceful, and the natural rhythm of segmented sleep reasserts itself with remarkable resilience. Thomas's dreams are no longer plagued by visions of death, but instead filled with images of tomorrow's normal activities. Wool to be sorted, lessons to be learned, the ordinary blessings of daily life that seemed so threatened just hours ago. The second sleep after crisis, you discover, has its own special quality. It's deeper than usual, as if the body is making up for the anxiety-broken first sleep. Throughout the village, others are experiencing the same profound rest, the kind that comes after danger has passed and normalcy can return. Even the usual sounds of the watching hour are muted. Fewer people moving about, less conversation through walls, as if the entire community has collectively decided to claim the rest they were denied earlier. Thomas sleeps so deeply that he doesn't stir when Master Edmund rises briefly to bank the fire, or when a late-returning villager calls out to the night watch. This is the healing power of the two-sleep pattern. Its ability to adapt to disruption and still provide the restoration that medieval life demands. As dawn approaches, Thomas begins the gradual ascent from deep sleep to the threshold time. But it's gentler than usual, his body somehow knowing that the crisis has passed and there's no need for vigilance. The experience has taught him something profound about the flexibility of human sleep patterns and the way community crisis can reshape even the most fundamental biological rhythms. You wake with Thomas to a dawn that feels like a benediction after the fearful night. The morning light seems especially precious as it streams through the shutters, and the normal sounds of village awakening, roosters crowing, doors opening, voices calling morning greetings, carry an undertone of collective relief. The family rises with more energy than might be expected after such a disrupted night, proof of the second sleep's restorative power. At breakfast, Master Edmund announces that he will send a gift of fine wool to the Cooper's family to help with the costs of William's care, a gesture of community solidarity that's expected after such shared anxiety. Agnes prepares a special porridge with precious spices to mark the passing of danger, and even the apprentices seem more cheerful than usual. Thomas understands now that the two-sleep pattern isn't just about individual rest, but about community rhythm. When crisis disrupts that rhythm, everyone suffers, and when it's restored, everyone benefits. The day's work proceeds with unusual enthusiasm, as if everyone is celebrating the return to normalcy. Through the shop window, Thomas sees young William's mother at the well, looking exhausted but relieved, accepting the congratulations and support of other village women. The crisis has actually strengthened community bonds, reminding everyone of their mutual dependence. As Thomas begins sorting wool, he reflects on how the two-sleep pattern, which seemed so strange when you first encountered it, now makes perfect sense as an adaptation to medieval life. Flexible enough to handle crisis, structured enough to support daily labor, and communal enough to bind society together through shared rhythms of rest and wakefulness. You spend the day with Thomas, observing how the village gradually returns to its normal patterns after the crisis, with everyone unconsciously preparing for a more traditional two-sleep night ahead. The shared experience of disrupted sleep has made everyone more appreciative of their usual rhythms. And throughout the day, you hear people discussing their plans for the watching hour with unusual anticipation. Old Martha, the herb woman, tells Agnes that crises like last night's actually prove the wisdom of segmented sleep. The watching hour provided a natural time for the community to share information and support, without disrupting the essential rest periods. Master Edmund uses the day to teach Thomas about the economics of crisis, how prices for certain goods rise when illness threatens, and how a wise merchant balances profit with community obligation. The lesson is interrupted when Father Benedict visits to thank Agnes for her herbs, and to report that William is sitting up and taking broth, his recovery seemingly complete. The priest mentions that during his vigil, he observed how the entire village's sleep pattern shifted in response to the threat, a phenomenon he's witnessed during other crises. As evening approaches, there's an almost festive atmosphere in the household. The apprentices joke more freely. Joan sings while helping with supper, and even stern Master Edmund smiles more than usual. Everyone seems to be looking forward to reclaiming their normal sleep pattern, to experiencing the watching hour as a time of peace rather than anxiety. Thomas helps prepare for the night with extra care, understanding now that the two-sleep pattern is both more fragile and more resilient than he'd previously realized. You settle with Thomas into what promises to be a restoration of the normal two-sleep pattern, with the evening prayers carrying special gratitude for the return of ordinary life. As darkness falls, the familiar routine feels almost ceremonial. The banking of the fire, the securing of valuables, the careful rationing of candles for the watching hour ahead. Agnes leads the family in a special prayer of thanksgiving for William's recovery, and Thomas notices how different the atmosphere is from just 24 hours ago. The preparation for first sleep carries an almost conscious appreciation for this ancient rhythm that they usually take for granted. As Thomas lies on his pallet, he reflects on how the two-sleep pattern shapes every aspect of medieval life, from the timing of crimes to the conception of children, from the transmission of stories to the processing of daily experiences into memory. The apprentice Richard whispers that he actually missed the proper watching hour last night, which makes Thomas realize how much the midnight waking has become part of their identity as medieval people. The first sleep comes easier tonight, welcomed like an old friend returning after an absence. Thomas's body seems to sink gratefully into the familiar rhythm, his mind releasing the residual anxiety of the previous night. Through the walls, the village too seems to be settling more peacefully, the collective unconscious realigning with the natural pattern that has governed human sleep for millennia. As consciousness fades, Thomas experiences a moment of perfect harmony with his world, understanding that the two-sleep pattern isn't just about rest, it's about belonging to a community that breathes, works, and sleeps in unison. You drift with Thomas through a first sleep that exemplifies everything medieval people valued about this initial rest period. His dreams are profound and symbolic. He sees himself as a master merchant, traveling to distant fairs, his wool transformed into cloth that adorns nobles and princes. These aren't mere fantasies, but the kind of visionary dreams that medieval people believed could predict future success or warn of coming challenges. In his dream, Thomas encounters William, fully recovered and grown into a successful cooper, making barrels for the finest wines. The dream William thanks Thomas for his family's prayers, suggesting the medieval belief that spiritual support during illness creates lasting bonds between souls. Throughout the village, others are experiencing similarly meaningful first sleep dreams. You're somehow aware that Master Edmund dreams of expanding his business to London, while Agnes dreams of her daughter Joan, grown into a successful merchant's wife. These first sleep visions are considered so important that many medieval people keep dream journals, recording the symbols and messages that come during this deep slumber. The quality of this sleep is markedly different from the previous night's disrupted rest. It's profound, healing, and psychologically integrative. Thomas's body performs its nightly restoration, his growth continuing as it only can during deep sleep, his mind consolidating the day's lessons about crisis, community, and resilience. The church bells remain silent, respecting this sacred period of rest. and even the usual night sounds seem muted, as if the world itself is honoring the human need for this first, deep period of restoration. You rise with Thomas into the watching hour, with the familiar but always slightly mysterious sensation of natural awakening in complete darkness. Tonight, the watching hour returns to its traditional character, a time of quiet contemplation and gentle activity, rather than crisis management. Master Edmund and Agnes engage in the kind of intimate conversation that the watching hour facilitates, discussing plans for Thomas's future education in the wool trade, whether to send him to London for apprenticeship with Edmund's brother, a successful cloth merchant. Thomas, pretending to sleep, listens with intense interest to his parents debating his future, understanding that many important family decisions are made during these dark hours, when minds are clear, but inhibitions are lowered by the intimacy of darkness. The apprentices are quietly active too. Richard practices his numbers on a wax tablet by touch, while Hugh reviews in his mind the techniques for judging wool quality that Edmund demonstrated today. This mental rehearsal during the watching hour is believed to solidify learning better than any daytime study. Through the walls come the comfortable sounds of a village in its proper rhythm. Quiet conversations. The occasional creak of someone moving about. A baby briefly crying before being soothed. Someone is playing a soft tune on a pipe. Probably young Tom, the shepherd's son, who often entertains himself during the watching hour with music that drifts through the village like a lullaby for those still awake. Agnes rises to use the chamber pot and check on Joan, who sometimes has disturbing dreams during the watching hour. Finding her daughter peaceful, she returns to bed and continues the discussion about Thomas's future, unaware that the subject of their conversation is absorbing every word. You experience with Thomas a profound moment during the watching hour when Master Edmund makes an unexpected decision to light a candle and bring Thomas into the conversation about his future. The gentle flickering light transforms the watching hour into something more formal, more significant. Edmund speaks directly to his son about the opportunities and challenges ahead, treating him not as a child, but as a young man approaching important decisions. This is another function of the watching hour, the time when difficult conversations happen, when truths are spoken that daylight might make too harsh or embarrassing. Edmund reveals that he's been saving money for years to pay for Thomas's advanced apprenticeship, that he has ambitions for his son beyond the small wool trade of Westbury. Agnes adds her own hopes that Thomas will marry well, perhaps to another merchant's daughter, creating an alliance that could establish a significant trading house. Thomas is overwhelmed by his parents' faith in him and their sacrifice, understanding suddenly how much of their watching hours must have been spent planning for his future. The apprentices, respectfully, pretend to sleep through this family moment, though Thomas knows they're listening. Watching hours create no real privacy, only the polite fiction of it. Through the window, a shooting star crosses the sky, which Agnes interprets as a divine blessing on their plans. The moment feels suspended in time, one of those watching hour conversations that will echo through the years, shaping decisions and destinies. When Edmund finally extinguishes the candle, Thomas lies in the darkness with his mind racing, the watching hour having transformed from a time of rest into a pivotal moment in his young life. You settle with Thomas back into the second sleep, but his mind struggles to release the weighty revelations of the watching hour. This is one of the challenges of segmented sleep. When significant conversations or events occur during the watching period, the second sleep can be delayed or disturbed by an active mind. Thomas employs the techniques his mother taught him for such situations, consciously relaxing each part of his body while repeating the Ave Maria in his mind, a meditation method that medieval people believe creates the proper mental state for second sleep. Gradually, the familiar rhythm reasserts itself, and Thomas begins to drift towards slumber, though his dreams will surely be coloured by thoughts of London, of grand merchant halls, of a future beyond Westbury's familiar boundaries. Around him, the household has returned to the second sleep with practiced ease. Master Edmund's snoring soon resumes its familiar pattern, while Agnes murmurs occasionally, perhaps dreaming of her son's future success. The apprentices have genuinely fallen back asleep, their breathing deep and regular. Through the village, the second sleep period has begun in earnest, that lighter but essential rest that prepares everyone for the coming dawn. Thomas's dreams, when they come, are indeed filled with visions of his potential future. He sees himself in London's great markets, hears the cries of merchants in languages he doesn't yet understand, feels the weight of responsibility that comes with his parents' expectations. Yet these anxiety-tinged dreams are balanced by a deep sense of purpose, a feeling that his life's path has become clearer through the watching hours revelations. The two-sleep pattern, he understands now, isn't just about physical rest, but about creating space for life's most important moments. You wake with Thomas to a dawn that feels different, charged with new possibility after the watching hours revelations. The morning routine proceeds as always, but Thomas moves through it with a changed awareness, knowing that these familiar patterns of village life may not be his future. As he helps with the morning water fetching, he looks at the village with new eyes, seeing both its limitations and its comforts, understanding why his parents want more for him, while also appreciating what he'll be leaving behind. At breakfast, there's a subtle shift in how his parents treat him, a new respect that acknowledges the conversation of the watching hour. Even the apprentices seem to sense the change, treating Thomas with a bit more deference, perhaps having overheard enough to know he's destined for greater things than Westbury's wool trade. The day's work takes on an educational quality, with Master Edmund explaining not just what to do, but why, preparing Thomas for the more complex commercial world of London. Agnes begins teaching him the finer points of household accounting, skills he'll need if he's to manage his own establishment someday. Joan, sensing but not understanding the change, clings more closely to her brother, instinctively aware that their time together may be limited. As the day progresses, Thomas realizes that the watching hour hasn't just revealed his future, it's transformed his present, making every familiar activity a conscious act of preparation or farewell. The two-sleep pattern, which seemed at first just a curious historical practice, now reveals itself as the framework within which medieval lives unfold. Decisions are made, and destinies are shaped. You experience with Thomas several more cycles of the two-sleep pattern, each night bringing new depths of understanding about this ancient rhythm. A week has passed since the crucial watching hour conversation, and the household has settled into a new dynamic that prepares for Thomas's eventual departure while maintaining the essential daily patterns of medieval life. Tonight's first sleep brings Thomas a particularly vivid dream about the road to London. He sees himself walking the ancient Roman road, pack on his back, leaving behind the church tower of Westbury as he heads toward adventure and uncertainty. The dream is so real, he can feel the pack's weight, smell the dust of the road, hear the calls of unfamiliar birds. When the watching hour arrives, Thomas finds himself in conversation with the apprentice Richard, who confesses his own dreams of advancement. They whisper in the darkness about their hopes and fears, the watching hour creating a space for honesty between them that daylight's hierarchy would prevent. Richard reveals that he too has been promised opportunity. When Thomas leaves, Richard will take his place as Edmund's primary student, eventually perhaps becoming a partner in the business. This news brings Thomas both relief and a strange jealousy, the complex emotions that the watching hour seems designed to process. Through the walls, they hear old Martha singing softly, one of the ancient songs that are only shared during the watching hours. melodies that carry the history and wisdom of the village in their verses. Thomas realizes he must learn these songs before he leaves, carry them with him to London, as a connection to his roots. You continue with Thomas through multiple nights, observing how the two-sleep pattern accommodates the gradual emotional preparation for major life changes. Each watching hour becomes an opportunity for different family members to process Thomas's impending departure in their own way. One night, little Joan creeps to Thomas's pallet during the watching hour, asking him to tell her stories about where he's going and promising to keep his memory alive in the village. Another night, Master Edmund uses the watching hour to share harder truths about London. The dangers, the temptations, the ways a young man can lose himself in the great city. These conversations could happen during daylight, but there's something about the watching hour that makes them more honest, more meaningful. The darkness strips away pretense and social performance, leaving only truth and emotion. Agnes begins using her watching hours to sew new clothes for Thomas, working by touch mostly, occasionally lighting a precious candle to check her stitching. The clothes are finer than anything Thomas has worn, marking his transition from village boy to urban apprentice. The second sleep after these emotional watching hours often brings dreams of integration. Thomas's mind processing the complex feelings of excitement, fear, love, and anticipated loss. He dreams of returning to Westbury successful, of his family's pride, but also of becoming so changed that the village no longer recognizes him. These dreams, medieval people believe, are preparing his soul for transformation. The two-sleep pattern providing the psychological framework for major life transitions. You experience with Thomas the way illness and recovery intersect with the two-sleep pattern when he develops a minor fever. Not dangerous like William's had been, but enough to confine him to bed for several days. The illness transforms his experience of segmented sleep, making the first sleep deeper but more troubled, filled with the vivid dreams that medieval people associate with fever. During his watching hours, Agnes tends to him with special care, using this wakeful time to administer herbal remedies and cooling cloths that she believes are most effective when the patient is naturally alert. The fever breaks during a watching hour, that liminal time when medieval people believe the body is most receptive to healing. Thomas experiences the moment of recovery as a kind of revelation, his mind suddenly clear after days of fog, the watching hour providing a perfect framework for the transition from illness back to health. Master Edmund sits with him during this crucial watching hour, speaking softly about his own youth, his own illnesses and recoveries, creating a father-son bond that transcends their usual formal relationship. The second sleep after fever breaks is believed to be especially restorative, and Thomas experiences it as such. A deep, healing slumber that seems to wash away not just the illness, but also some of his anxiety about leaving home. When he wakes at dawn, he feels renewed in body and spirit, understanding now how the two-sleep pattern serves not just health, but also healing, providing natural checkpoints through the night, where the body's recovery can be assessed and supported. You witness with Thomas how the village prepares for the autumn harvest festival, an event that will dramatically alter the two-sleep pattern for several nights. The festival, coinciding with the full moon, is one of the few times when medieval people deliberately disrupt their segmented sleep to participate in communal celebrations that extend through what would normally be the watching hour. As the festival night approaches, Thomas observes how everyone seems to store up sleep, going to their first sleep earlier and extending their second sleep when possible, unconsciously preparing for the disruption ahead. The festival night itself is magical. Instead of the watching hour's usual quiet intimacy, the entire village gathers in the square, lit by bonfires and the brilliant harvest moon. Music, dancing, and storytelling replace the normal watching hour activities, and Thomas experiences a different kind of communal consciousness, one based on celebration rather than quiet contemplation. Yet even in this disruption, echoes of the two-sleep pattern remain. Around what would normally be the watching hour, there's a natural lull in the festivities, a moment when people gather around fires for quieter activities. Stories are told, songs are sung, couples steal away for private moments. It's as if the watching hour insists on expressing itself, even when its normal framework is suspended. When the village finally returns to sleep near dawn, it's not the usual second sleep, but something more like collapse. And the next day everyone moves slowly, their internal clocks disrupted. Thomas understands that the two-sleep pattern is so fundamental to medieval life that its disruption, even for celebration, extracts a price in exhaustion and disorientation. You experience with Thomas the recovery from the harvest festival's disruption as the village slowly returns to its normal two-sleep pattern over several nights. The first night after the festival, everyone retires early, their bodies craving the familiar rhythm of first sleep. But the pattern has been disturbed, and Thomas finds himself waking at odd times. Too early for the watching hour, too late for continuous sleep. Around him, others are experiencing similar disruption. He hears Joan crying because she can't fall back asleep, Agnes moving about trying to soothe her, Edmund tossing restlessly. The apprentices whisper about how strange it feels, this disconnection from their normal rhythm. It takes 3 full nights for the pattern to fully re-establish itself, and Thomas notices how irritable everyone becomes during this adjustment period. Work suffers, tempers fray, and minor mistakes multiply. The baker burns a batch of bread, the blacksmith misshapes a horseshoe, and Master Edmund makes an error in his ledger that takes hours to correct. This teaches Thomas something profound about the two-sleep pattern. It's not just a habit, but a deeply embedded biological rhythm that, once disrupted, demands time and patience to restore. By the 4th night, when the watching hour finally arrives at its proper time and everyone wakes naturally together, there's an almost audible sigh of relief throughout the village. The familiar comfort of segmented sleep has returned, and with it, the sense of order and predictability that medieval life depends upon. Thomas lies in the darkness of the restored watching hour, appreciating as never before the gentle structure that the two-sleep pattern provides to the chaos of human existence. You approach with Thomas his final weeks in Westbury, before the journey to London, and the two-sleep pattern becomes a framework for farewell. Each watching hour is precious now, opportunities for last conversations, final lessons, and the transmission of family wisdom that can only happen in the intimate darkness. Master Edmund uses these watching hours to share trade secrets he's never told anyone, not even the apprentices. Which merchants can be trusted, which routes are safest, how to detect counterfeit coins in candlelight. Agnes whispers recipes and remedies, making Thomas repeat them back until they're fixed in his memory. Knowledge that might save his life in the uncertain world of London. Even little Joan has her watching hour moments, curling up beside her brother to make him promise he'll come back, that he won't forget her, or the songs she's taught him. The first sleep brings Thomas dreams of departure and return, cyclical visions that seem to prepare his psyche for the journey ahead. His second sleep is often restless, his body already anticipating the disruption of travel, the nights he'll spend in strange inns or under open sky, far from the familiar rhythm of home. The apprentices treat him differently now during the watching hours, with a respect tinged with envy. Richard shares his own family's stories, gifts of narrative that Thomas can carry to London. Hugh teaches him a knife trick that might be useful in the city's dangerous streets. Each watching hour becomes a small ceremony of transmission, the village preparing to send forth one of its own into the wider world. You experience with Thomas his last full night in Westbury, where the two-sleep pattern takes on an almost ceremonial quality. The entire household seems aware that this is a threshold moment, and the evening prayers include special petitions for Thomas's safety and success. The first sleep comes hard for Thomas, his mind too full of anticipation and anxiety to easily surrender to slumber. When he finally drifts off, his dreams are a kaleidoscope of past and future, his childhood in Westbury blending with imagined scenes of London life, faces of family morphing into strangers he has yet to meet. The watching hour, when it comes, finds the entire household awake, as if by agreement. Master Edmund lights not one, but 3 precious candles, declaring this a night worthy of extravagance. In this unusual brightness, the family gathers around Thomas for a ritual that Agnes says her own mother performed when Edmund left for his apprenticeship years ago. Each family member places a hand on Thomas and speaks a blessing or wish for his future. Edmund wishes him wisdom in trade, Agnes health and protection, Joan that he'll find love and happiness. Even the apprentices participate, their blessings those of brothers rather than mere household members. Marjorie, the serving girl, shyly offers him a small charm she's made, a protection against the evils of the road. The ceremony transforms the watching hour into something sacred, a conscious marking of transition that the two-sleep pattern facilitates. When they finally return to their beds for the second sleep, Thomas feels changed, carrying his community's blessings into his dreams and onward into his future. You wake with Thomas on his final morning in Westbury, the dawn of departure arriving with a mixture of excitement and melancholy. The two-sleep pattern has prepared him as well as possible for this transition, the watching hours having provided space for all necessary farewells and transmissions of wisdom. Yet, as he rises for the last time from his familiar pallet, Thomas feels the weight of leaving this intricate rhythm of life that has shaped his entire existence. The morning proceeds with studied normalcy. Agnes prepares breakfast as always. Edmund reviews the day's planned route one more time. The apprentices go about their usual tasks. But there's an undercurrent of emotion that transforms these routine activities into ritual. Thomas realizes that wherever he sleeps tonight, it won't be within this familiar pattern of communal rest and waking. London, he's been told, is already beginning to abandon the two-sleep pattern among its wealthier merchants, who can afford abundant candles and lamp oil. He may never again experience the watching hour quite as he has here, surrounded by family, shaped by centuries of tradition. As he shoulders his pack and prepares to leave, Thomas takes one last look at the sleeping chamber, where so much of his life has unfolded in darkness and dreams. He understands now that the two-sleep pattern wasn't just about rest. It was about community, family, and the deep rhythms that bind human lives together. Whatever sleep patterns await him in London, they will never quite replace what he's leaving behind. The church bells ring for prime, and Thomas steps out into the morning light, carrying within him the memory of 1,000 watching hours. You journey with Thomas down the road from Westbury, each step taking him further from the world of segmented sleep toward an uncertain future where such patterns may no longer exist. As the village disappears behind a hill, Thomas realizes he carries within him something precious. The complete experience of humanity's ancient sleep pattern, a knowledge that may soon be lost to the world. That first night on the road, sleeping in a monastery's guest house, Thomas finds himself automatically waking at the watching hour. But alone now, without the comforting sounds of family breathing around him. He lies in the darkness, understanding that this solitary watching is his new reality. Yet he's not entirely alone. Through the walls, he hears monks rising for matins, maintaining their own sacred version of the two-sleep pattern. Their chanted prayers provide a familiar rhythm, and Thomas realizes that wherever he goes, as long as churches mark the hours and humans honor their natural rhythms, something of the two-sleep pattern will endure. In London, he may find new patterns, perhaps even the consolidated sleep that merchants speak of with such pride. But he'll always carry within him the muscle memory of the watching hour, the profound rest of first sleep, the integrative dreams of second sleep. As he drifts back into his second sleep, alone but not lonely, Thomas understands that he's carrying more than his possessions to London. He's carrying an entire way of being human that shaped his ancestors for millennia. The two-sleep pattern may fade from the world, replaced by the demands of commerce and artificial light. But in Thomas's memory, and perhaps in yours, as you drift toward your own uninterrupted sleep, it remains alive, a reminder of the different ways humans have found to rest, restore, and dream. The watching hour may be ending for civilization, but its wisdom endures in the quiet moments between waking and sleep, in the conversations that happen in darkness, in the understanding that rest, like life itself, can take many forms.